forgotten army stagecoach hid more than gold, and one loyal K9 uncovered the secret powerful men killed to protect. Deep in Colorado's rugged San Juan Mountains, a homeless former Navy SEAL and his retired military K9 stumble upon a century-old stagecoach everyone believed was only a legend. But when the dog uncovers a hidden vault, they awaken a secret buried for 100 years, one that could destroy a powerful family forever. Comment 1 if you'd risk everything to uncover the truth, or 0 if you'd leave the mountain's secret buried. And tell us where you're watching from. The old-timers of Silver Hollow liked to say that the San Juan Mountains remembered everything. They remembered every miner who never came home, every cabin swallowed by avalanches, every campfire promise carried away by the wind. Long before highways cut through the Rockies and tourists came searching for colorful autumn leaves, these mountains had already witnessed lives built and broken beneath their towering peaks. Among all the stories passed from one generation to the next, none lingered longer than the tale of the Silver Creek stagecoach. According to local legend, it disappeared during the winter of 1924. The stagecoach had been carrying Army payroll, bags of freshly minted gold destined for isolated frontier garrisons tucked deep within Colorado's mountains. Escorted by armed guards, the coach departed from Durango just before an early-season blizzard swept across the high country. It never reached its destination. Search parties found frozen horses, broken harnesses, scattered tracks buried beneath drifting snow. But the stagecoach itself vanished. Some believed desperate outlaws had ambushed the convoy. Others insisted an avalanche buried it forever beneath thousands of tons of stone and ice. Older ranchers simply shrugged whenever the subject came up. The mountain kept what belonged to it. Over the decades, treasure hunters arrived carrying maps, metal detectors, and dreams larger than common sense. They climbed ridges, searched abandoned mines, explored forgotten canyons, and spent fortunes chasing rumors. Every one of them returned empty-handed. Eventually, the Silver Creek stagecoach became little more than a bedtime story, a legend, a ghost wrapped in snow. Only the mountains knew the truth, and the mountains never talked. Several miles outside Silver Hollow, beneath an abandoned railroad bridge whose wooden beams had long ago turned gray from decades of snow and rain, another forgotten soul greeted the dawn. Daniel Mercer slowly opened his eyes. Cold mountain air drifted beneath the bridge, carrying the scent of pine needles, damp earth, and distant cedar smoke rising from ranch houses scattered across the valley. He remained perfectly still. Old habits never truly disappeared. His breathing slowed. His ears worked before his eyes. Running water, wind through cottonwoods, a pickup truck somewhere along Highway 550. No footsteps, no voices, no immediate danger. Only then did he sit up. His sleeping bag was patched in 6 different places. His backpack rested against one of the bridge supports. Beside it sat a pair of worn work boots whose leather had cracked from years of use. Nothing about Daniel Mercer suggested the man he had once been. His beard had grown unevenly over months without regular trimming. Deep lines crossed his weathered face long before age alone should have carved them there. His faded flannel shirt hid shoulders still broad enough to hint at years spent carrying gear heavier than most men could imagine. Only his posture betrayed him. Even after another night sleeping on gravel beneath a bridge, he stood like a soldier, not by choice, by memory. A soft movement beside him broke the silence. Atlas lifted his head. The large German shepherd blinked once before quietly standing. His silver and black coat shimmered beneath the pale morning light, filtering through the bridge beams overhead. A white scar crossed the bridge of his nose. Another disappeared beneath the thick fur of his left shoulder. His muzzle had begun turning gray. Years of service had left their mark on both of them. Atlas stretched slowly before walking over to Daniel. Without making a sound, He gently pressed his head against Daniel's side. Daniel smiled. It was small, almost invisible. "Morning, partner." Atlas's tail gave 2 slow thumps against the dirt. Daniel reached into his backpack. Breakfast consisted of 2 pieces of stale bread and half a package of beef jerky someone from the church pantry had handed him 3 days earlier. He broke the jerky exactly in half. Atlas accepted his portion gently, never grabbing, never rushing. Military training stayed with dogs, too. They ate in silence. Above them, an old freight train rumbled across the bridge. The vibration traveled through weathered timbers and down the concrete pillars. For a split second, Daniel froze. His breathing changed. The sound became something else. Rotors, heavy rotor blades, dust, radio chatter, incoming. His hands tightened around the empty paper wrapper until his knuckles turned white. Atlas immediately stepped closer. The German shepherd placed one paw against Daniel's knee. Solid, steady, present. Daniel closed his eyes. The bridge became a bridge again. The train became only a train. His heartbeat slowly settled. He rubbed Atlas behind one ear. "Thanks." No one in Silver Hollow knew how many battles the old dog had quietly won after the war ended. By sunrise, they were walking toward town. Silver Hollow rested beneath towering granite peaks, where weathered storefronts lined a single main street. A diner, a feed store, a gas station, a hardware shop. One blinking traffic light. The kind of place where everyone noticed strangers and remembered family histories going back generations. Daniel wasn't exactly a stranger anymore. Neither was he accepted. People recognized him, the homeless veteran. Some nodded politely. Others looked away. Most simply carried on with their day. Daniel preferred it that way. He stopped outside Cooper's Feed and Ranch Supply. A handwritten sign hung in the window. Help needed, fence repairs, cash daily. He stepped inside. The smell of leather, grain, and machine oil filled the air. Old Hank Cooper stood behind the counter tallying invoices. Without looking up, he said, "Morning, Mercer. Morning. You still willing to work?" "Always." Hank finally glanced toward him. "You ever fix barbed wire?" Daniel almost laughed. "I've repaired communications towers under mortar fire." Hank raised one eyebrow. "I'll take that as a yes." 40 minutes later, they were bouncing across a ranch road inside Hank's aging pickup. Atlas sat quietly in the truck bed, ears pointed into the wind. "You don't talk much," Hank observed. Daniel stared out across the valley. "Didn't used to." "What changed?" Daniel watched sunlight creep down distant mountain slopes. "Life." Hank didn't ask another question. Some silences deserved respect. The ranch sat near the northern edge of the valley, where old fencing had begun collapsing after heavy snowfall the previous winter. Daniel worked steadily, removing rotten posts, stretching fresh wire, driving staples with practiced precision. Every movement economical. Every tool returned exactly where it belonged. Atlas never wandered far. He patrolled quietly along the fence line, occasionally stopping to study the surrounding forest. Watching. Listening. Protecting. Around noon, Hank handed Daniel a bottle of water. "You military boys all work like this?" Daniel shrugged. "Some habits don't retire." Hank nodded thoughtfully. "My brother came back from Vietnam." Daniel remained silent. "He used to stare at the mountains same way you do." Daniel looked toward the distant peaks. "I don't stare." "No." Hank smiled sadly. "You measure." The words lingered longer than either man expected. Late that afternoon, the work finished. Hank counted several folded bills into Daniel's hand. Same time next week? Daniel nodded. If you'll have me, I'll have you. As Daniel and Atlas started walking back toward town, Hank watched them disappear along the dusty roadside. Good dog, the old rancher muttered quietly. Atlas glanced back once, almost as if he'd heard. The sun slipped behind the western mountains. Long shadows stretched across the valley. Daniel returned beneath the old railroad bridge. Home. Or something close enough. He gathered fallen branches for a small cooking fire. Atlas wandered a short distance before suddenly stopping. His ears stood upright. His body stiffened. Daniel noticed immediately. What is it? Atlas stared toward the mountains, not barking, not growling, listening, far beyond the valley. Dark clouds gathered above the highest peaks. A low rumble echoed across the San Juans. Thunder. The first storm of early autumn was coming. Daniel followed Atlas's gaze. Something about the approaching weather unsettled him. Not fear, recognition. The mountains seemed strangely quiet. Birdsong had vanished. Even the wind had changed direction. Atlas slowly returned to Daniel's side. The old dog leaned against him once more. Daniel rested one hand on Atlas's neck. Neither veteran could possibly know that somewhere beyond those gathering storm clouds, hidden inside a canyon untouched for 100 years, the mountain had begun surrendering a secret buried beneath stone, snow, and silence. And before another sunrise, Atlas would become the first living soul in a century to find it. The storm arrived during the darkest hours before dawn. Rain hammered the old railroad bridge with a violence that shook loose decades of dust from its weathered beams. Wind screamed through the valley, bending cottonwoods until their branches scraped against the steel supports overhead. Lightning split the sky again and again, briefly turning the San Juan Mountains into jagged white silhouettes before plunging them back into darkness. Daniel Mercer didn't sleep much. Storms rarely allowed him to. Each clap of thunder tugged at memories his mind never fully buried. For brief moments he found himself gripping his sleeping bag, as if it were tactical gear, his breathing becoming shallow, before Atlas quietly pressed closer. The old German shepherd never barked. He simply stayed beside him, grounding him, reminding him where he truly was. By sunrise, the storm had finally moved east. Silence settled across the valley. An unnatural silence, the kind that followed tremendous force. Daniel climbed from beneath the bridge and looked toward the mountains. Fresh snow dusted the highest peaks despite it being early autumn. Lower down, ribbons of muddy water spilled through canyons where dry creek beds had existed only yesterday. Atlas lifted his nose into the cool morning air. His ears twitched. Something smelled different. Back in Silver Hollow, people slowly emerged from homes and businesses, inspecting broken fences, fallen trees, and flooded roads. At Cooper's Feed and Ranch Supply, Hank Cooper stood beside his pickup, studying a folded county map. You came. Daniel adjusted his backpack. Said I would. Hank nodded toward the truck. Need help. Within minutes, they were climbing narrow mountain roads leading northwest of town. Every few miles, they encountered fresh damage. Rock slides, washed-out culverts, telephone poles leaning at dangerous angles. The storm had rewritten the landscape overnight. Hank shook his head. 40 years up here. He whistled softly. Never seen rain move this much mountain. Daniel watched loose stones continue tumbling down distant cliffs. The mountain was already weak. You know geology now? Daniel gave a faint smile. I know unstable ground. The old rancher glanced sideways, but didn't ask where he'd learned that lesson. Eventually, they reached the Morrison Ranch, one of the oldest cattle operations in the valley. 3 sections of fencing had vanished beneath mud. Cattle wandered nervously across open pasture. An elderly rancher named Walter Morrison waved from horseback. "Glad you boys made it." His lined face looked more tired than frightened. "Lost nearly a mile of fence." Daniel accepted fencing tools without complaint. Atlas immediately began patrolling ahead. Walter watched the dog disappear among sagebrush. "That's one disciplined shepherd. He worked for the Navy." Walter raised an eyebrow. "So did you." Daniel simply nodded. Neither man spoke of it again. Hours passed repairing twisted fencing. The work soothed Daniel's mind. Stretch, hammer, tie wire, repeat. Simple problems often felt like gifts. By midday, the clouds had broken apart. Sunlight poured into the valley, illuminating fresh scars carved into every mountainside. Walter rode over. "I've got another section needs checking." He pointed toward a narrow canyon several miles west. "Nobody's been back there since the storm." Daniel looked across the rugged terrain. "I'll take a look." Walter handed him binoculars. "Take Atlas." Daniel smiled. Wasn't planning to leave him. They followed an old cattle trail that climbed steadily into the foothills. Ponderosa pines gave way to dense spruce. The air cooled noticeably beneath the towering trees. Small waterfalls crossed the trail, where none had existed before. Atlas moved confidently ahead, sometimes stopping, sometimes sniffing, always watching. Daniel noticed subtle details others would ignore. Fresh rock dust, broken branches, mud still sliding slowly beneath exposed roots. Every instinct told him the mountain remained unstable. About an hour later, they entered a narrow valley surrounded by towering sandstone cliffs. Walter's damaged fencing stretched along the canyon floor. Most of it lay buried beneath enormous piles of rock. Daniel quietly surveyed the destruction. This wasn't just runoff. He knelt beside a boulder larger than a pickup truck. Entire cliff face collapsed. Atlas wandered farther ahead. The German shepherd suddenly froze. His ears snapped forward. His body became perfectly still. Daniel recognized that posture immediately. Atlas had found something. "What is it, partner?" Instead of returning, Atlas barked. Once, twice. Then began climbing over broken rock toward the base of the canyon wall. Daniel hurried after him. Loose gravel shifted beneath every step. The landslide had exposed fresh stone, unlike the weathered canyon surrounding it. Atlas reached the end of the debris field. He stood beneath an immense vertical cliff, looking upward, not moving. Daniel followed the dog's gaze. At first, he saw nothing. Only shattered sandstone glowing orange beneath afternoon sunlight. Then, his eyes caught something impossible. Far above them, half hidden inside a newly exposed ledge. A wheel. Large, wooden, broken. Daniel slowly lifted the binoculars. His breath caught. The weathered spokes still clung to an iron rim blackened by a century of mountain weather. Above it, splintered beams protruded from the cliff, a faded section of curved roof, the remains of a driver's bench. An entire stagecoach rested impossibly high against the canyon wall, wedged between two massive rock formations, as though the mountain itself had swallowed it whole. Daniel lowered the binoculars. His heart pounded. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible." Atlas barked again, this time more urgently. The old dog scrambled several feet higher across loose stone before stopping beneath the exposed wreck. His nose worked furiously. Daniel climbed after him until he reached a stable outcrop overlooking the canyon. From there, the shape became unmistakable. It wasn't debris. It wasn't abandoned mining equipment. It was a stagecoach. almost perfectly preserved beneath layers of rock that had hidden it for generations. Pieces of faded black paint still clung to weathered wood. One axle remained intact. The driver's box leaned slightly outward, suspended over empty air. Daniel's military instincts took over. He automatically studied the terrain. Distance, approach routes, rock stability, possible climbing anchors. His pulse steadied. His breathing slowed. Mission focus. Atlas suddenly began whining softly. Not from fear, from determination. The dog pawed repeatedly at fresh mud near the cliff base before looking back toward Daniel. "What do you smell?" Atlas continued scratching. Daniel crouched beside him. Fresh rock, wet earth, old timber. Something else and faint. Metal. Daniel looked upward again. The mountain seemed almost unreal in the afternoon light. Could it be the legend? He remembered hearing old ranch hands mention something around diner counters, a payroll wagon, army gold, vanished during a blizzard. He'd never paid attention. Ghost stories belonged to other people, not him. Yet the impossible sat directly overhead, hidden where no search party would ever think to look. Daniel slowly raised his camera phone. The signal bars were gone. No service. Still, he photographed everything. Wide shots, close-ups, the wheel, the broken roof, the driver's bench, every angle he could capture. Atlas never stopped watching the stagecoach, as though he understood. This discovery mattered. Far below, Walter Morrison finally appeared along the trail, waving both arms. "Daniel!" His voice echoed through the canyon. "You all right?" Daniel looked back one last time at the ancient wreck, then at Atlas. Neither veteran could know that hidden inside that silent wooden shell rested enough gold to change lives. Nor could they imagine that the true treasure waiting above them wasn't gold at all. It was the truth, and somewhere beyond the mountains. Another man was about to learn that someone had finally found what his family had spent 100 years making sure stayed buried. Garrett Holloway stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office overlooking Silver Hollow. From the outside, the Holloway development building looked like every other modern office tucked into a mountain town. Inside, polished hardwood floors reflected the afternoon sunlight. Framed photographs celebrated decades of successful land projects, and awards lined the walls beneath the Holloway family crest. Visitors saw prosperity. Garrett saw inheritance. His great-grandfather had settled this valley long before anyone else, or so the family story claimed. Every generation had repeated the same lesson. Protect the land. Protect the family. Protect the name. His secretary stepped quietly into the office. "Mr. Holloway?" He turned. "Yes?" "You asked me to monitor the ranch reports after the storm." She handed him a tablet. One of Walter Morrison's workers photographed something unusual. Garrett barely glanced at the screen. Then he froze. The image showed only part of an ancient wooden wheel protruding from a canyon wall. Most people would have dismissed it. Garrett did not. His expression hardened. "Who took this?" "A ranch hand." She checked her notes. "Daniel Mercer." For several seconds, Garrett said nothing. Then he calmly closed the tablet. "Thank you." The secretary left. Only after the office door closed did Garrett slowly exhale. He walked toward an old wooden cabinet hidden behind framed architectural drawings. Inside rested several leather-bound journals inherited from his grandfather. One sentence written decades earlier returned to him with uncomfortable clarity. "If the coach is ever found, everything ends." Garrett quietly shut the cabinet. "No." His voice barely rose above a whisper. It can't happen. Back in Silver Hollow, Daniel Mercer returned Walter Morrison's truck just before sunset. Walter studied him carefully. You look like you saw a ghost. Daniel handed back the binoculars. Maybe I did. Walter chuckled. What did you find? Daniel hesitated. For a moment he considered saying nothing. The mountain had kept its secrets for 100 years. Perhaps it wanted them left alone. Atlas sat quietly beside him. The old dog looked toward the western mountains again, waiting. Daniel finally reached into his pocket. He pulled out his phone. I found this. Walter adjusted his glasses. The old rancher's smile slowly disappeared. He enlarged the photograph. His weathered face became almost colorless. Lord, he whispered. It can't be. You know what it is? Walter stared at the image for a long time. My grandfather used to tell stories. What stories? The Silver Creek Stagecoach. Daniel nodded. I think I found it. Walter looked around as though someone might overhear. You tell anybody else? Not yet. The old rancher folded his arms. If that's real, he stopped himself. Daniel noticed. If it's real, what? Walter shook his head. Nothing. He forced a weak smile. Probably just old mining equipment. But Daniel could see uncertainty filling the old man's eyes, the kind of uncertainty that belonged to someone remembering things they had tried to forget. By morning, the photographs had spread farther than Daniel intended. Not because of him. Because Walter's teenage grandson had briefly seen the images while helping unload fencing supplies. One conversation became 2. 2 became 10. By lunchtime, nearly everyone inside Ruby's diner was discussing the mysterious discovery. The bell above the diner's entrance chimed softly as Daniel stepped inside. Conversations stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Coffee cups remained suspended in weathered hands. Daniel ordered only a cup of black coffee. He carried it to an empty booth beside the window. Atlas lay quietly beneath the table. Silence followed them. Finally, someone laughed. Another joined in, then another. An older rancher leaned across the counter. You hear? What? Mercer found pirate treasure. Several men laughed openly. It's a stagecoach, another joked. Maybe ghosts are paying army salaries now. Daniel ignored them. Years earlier, insults would have stirred anger. Combat had taught him something different. Not every fight deserved answering. The front door opened again. Garrett Holloway entered. Every conversation immediately changed. People nodded. Several stood. Garrett greeted everyone by name before casually walking toward Daniel's booth. He smiled politely. Mind if I sit? Daniel shrugged. Free country. Garrett took the opposite seat. He looked briefly beneath the table. Atlas calmly met his gaze. Beautiful shepherd. Daniel reached down to scratch Atlas behind one ear. He earned every gray hair. Garrett smiled again. I've heard quite the story. Daniel remained silent. The old stagecoach, he chuckled lightly. Interesting photographs. Daniel sipped his coffee. Garrett leaned forward. You know, his voice lowered. Mountain weather does strange things. Daniel looked at him. So I've heard. People see patterns where none exist. Garrett's smile never faded, especially after difficult experiences. The words hung in the air. Around them, conversations stopped once again. Everyone listened. Garrett continued. I've worked with veterans before. Daniel's expression remained unchanged. PTSD can make memories blend with reality. Several people nodded sympathetically. Garrett spread his hands. No shame in it. Daniel slowly placed his coffee cup on the table. You finished? Garrett blinked. I only meant... You finished. For the first time, Garrett's smile faltered. Yes. Daniel stood. Atlas immediately rose beside him. Without another word, they walked toward the exit. Behind them, someone muttered quietly. Poor guy. Another whispered, War changes people. Outside, crisp mountain air filled Daniel's lungs. He kept walking. Only after reaching the sidewalk did he stop. Atlas gently nudged his hand. Daniel closed his eyes. For just 1 second, the diner disappeared. Concrete walls, flashing lights, medical evaluations, psychological screenings. Questions asked over and over again. Do you believe you're seeing things? No. Can you distinguish memory from reality? Yes. Then why can't you sleep? Atlas pressed against his leg. The flashback faded. Daniel opened his eyes. I'm okay. The words sounded less convincing than he intended. Across town, someone had quietly watched the entire exchange. Dr. Emily Carter stepped out of her veterinary clinic carrying a cardboard box of medical supplies. She had treated Atlas twice during the previous winter, after finding him limping through town beside Daniel. She remembered the remarkable discipline of the old military dog. More importantly, she remembered Daniel. He had refused charity, refused sympathy, paid every veterinary bill $1 at a time over several months. A dishonest man didn't usually do that. Emily watched him disappear down Main Street. Something about Garrett's performance inside the diner bothered her. It felt rehearsed. That evening, curiosity finally won. She drove toward Walter Morrison's ranch. Walter greeted her outside his barn. What brings you here? I heard about the photographs. Walter hesitated. You hear fast. So does gossip. He sighed. You want to see them? Minutes later, they sat inside his kitchen. Walter handed over Daniel's phone after receiving permission earlier that afternoon. Emily enlarged each image. Once, twice, then a third time. She wasn't looking at the stagecoach. She was studying the surrounding rock. Her brow furrowed. Walter noticed. What? She pointed toward the exposed cliff. Look here. Walter squinted. I don't see anything. Exactly. What? There should be impact damage. Walter frowned. If a stagecoach crashed, she nodded, it would splinter. Right. It would scatter. Right. She enlarged the photograph again, but this one didn't. Walter looked again. The ancient coach rested unnaturally upright between two rock formations. Almost placed. Emily slowly lowered the phone. Someone wanted this hidden. Walter stared at her. You really think that's the actual Silver Creek stagecoach? Emily answered without hesitation. I think Daniel found something. She looked toward the mountains visible through the kitchen window. And I think someone is already trying to make sure nobody believes him. Far beneath the old railroad bridge, Daniel sat beside a small campfire. Atlas rested with his head across Daniel's boots. The veteran stared into the flames. Maybe Garrett was right. Maybe people would always see him as damaged, broken, unreliable, a soldier who couldn't leave old wars behind. Atlas suddenly lifted his head. The German shepherd looked toward the mountains. His ears stood upright. Then he quietly walked over and laid something in Daniel's lap. the folded county map Walter had accidentally left inside the truck. Daniel unfolded it. His eyes found the canyon, then the stagecoach, then the impossible climb waiting beyond. Atlas looked up at him, waiting. Daniel smiled for the first time all day. "You're not letting this go." Atlas's tail gave one slow thump. Daniel folded the map carefully. Neither am I. Neither man nor dog realized that before another week had passed, the mountain would test far more than their courage. It would ask whether two strangers were willing to trust each other with their lives. The following morning arrived wrapped in cold mist that drifted through the streets of Silver Hollow like pale smoke. Daniel Mercer had barely slept. The county map lay folded beside his sleeping bag, while the photographs of the stagecoach replayed in his mind every time he closed his eyes. He had spent years trying to avoid impossible missions. Life had just handed him another one. Atlas was already awake. The old German shepherd stood beneath the railroad bridge, staring toward the mountains with the same quiet determination he had shown the day before. Daniel poured the last of his coffee from a dented metal cup. "So that's where we're going again?" Atlas looked back. His tail moved once. Daniel smiled faintly. "I figured." An hour later, they were walking toward Walter Morrison's ranch when the sound of tires crunching over gravel interrupted the quiet morning. A dusty green pickup slowed beside them. The driver's window rolled down. Dr. Emily Carter sat behind the wheel. Her auburn hair was tied beneath a faded baseball cap, and a pair of hiking gloves rested on the passenger seat beside coils of climbing rope. She studied Daniel for a moment. "I've been looking for you." Daniel nodded politely. "You found me. I saw your photographs." He said nothing. "I believe you." For the first time since discovering the stagecoach, someone had spoken those words without hesitation. Daniel searched her face for doubt. He found none. Emily reached across the seat and handed him several enlarged photographs she had printed overnight. "I marked something." Daniel looked down. Red circles highlighted the cliff surrounding the stagecoach. "The rock isn't fractured beneath it," Emily explained. "If it had fallen naturally, the impact would have shattered everything around it." Daniel slowly followed each marked area. She was right. The sandstone beneath the coach remained surprisingly intact. "It looks," he began. "Placed," Emily finished. They stood in silence. Wind stirred through nearby aspens. Atlas walked over and sniffed the photographs before looking toward the mountains once again. Emily smiled. "I think he agrees." Daniel finally asked the question that mattered. "Why are you helping me?" Emily rested both hands on the steering wheel. "Because I've lived here my whole life." She glanced toward the distant peaks. "My father was a search and rescue volunteer." She paused. "He used to tell me something." Daniel waited. "The mountains don't hide people." "What do they do?" "They wait until someone is ready to find them." Daniel looked down at Atlas. "I'm not sure I'm ready." Atlas gently nudged his hand. Emily noticed. "I think your partner disagrees." She climbed from the truck and opened the bed. Inside were climbing helmets, harnesses, ropes, pitons, carabiners, and camping equipment carefully organized into waterproof bins. Daniel looked surprised. "You own all this?" "My brother and I climbed 14ers every summer." She smiled sadly. "He passed away 5 years ago." "I'm sorry." "So am I." She lifted one of the ropes. "I haven't used any of this since." Daniel remained quiet. Emily walked closer. "I can't climb that canyon alone." She looked him directly in the eyes. "And you shouldn't either." The decision took only a few seconds. "All right," Emily smiled. "When do we leave?" Daniel looked toward the gathering clouds above the mountains. "Now." By mid-morning, they reached Walter Morrison's ranch. The elderly rancher watched them unload equipment. "You two really going back?" Daniel nodded. Walter removed his hat. "I hoped you wouldn't." Emily tightened the straps on her backpack. "Because it's dangerous?" Walter stared toward the western ridges. "Because some places aren't forgotten by accident." No one answered. Walter finally walked into his barn and returned carrying an old canvas bag. "My grandfather left this." Inside rested weathered climbing spikes, thick hemp rope, and a brass compass blackened with age. He always said, if anyone ever found the Silver Creek coach— Walter swallowed. "They'd need these." Daniel accepted the bag carefully. "Why didn't you tell me yesterday?" Walter looked embarrassed. "Didn't think I believed the stories anymore." He reached down to scratch Atlas behind one ear. Guess the mountain decided otherwise. The journey back to the canyon felt different. Daniel no longer walked alone. Emily kept a steady pace beside him, carrying nearly as much gear as he did. Atlas moved ahead through dense pine forest, occasionally stopping to make sure both humans followed. The trail narrowed. Fallen trees forced them to climb over slick trunks coated with emerald moss. Fresh streams crossed their path where heavy rain had carved new channels through the mountainside. Above them, golden aspens shimmered beneath bright autumn sunlight. The wilderness seemed peaceful. Too peaceful. Daniel suddenly stopped. Emily nearly walked into him. "What is it?" He pointed toward a section of loose rock. "Listen." They stood motionless. Tiny pebbles skipped quietly down the slope. Then another. The mountain was still settling. Daniel chose a different route around the unstable hillside. Emily watched him carefully. "You noticed that from 20 yards away?" Daniel shrugged. "You learned to hear unstable ground." She didn't ask where. She already knew. By early afternoon, they reached the canyon once again. The ancient stagecoach still rested high above them, silent, waiting. Even after seeing it before, Daniel found himself staring. Emily removed her binoculars. "My God." She whispered the words almost reverently. "It's actually real." Atlas barked once, then immediately began climbing toward the landslide. Daniel and Emily followed. They stopped beneath the towering cliff, looking straight upward. The climb appeared almost impossible. The exposed ledge sat nearly 150 feet above the canyon floor. Between them and the wreck stretched fractured sandstone, loose gravel, narrow shelves, and steep chimneys barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Emily exhaled slowly. "I've climbed mountains." She looked upward. "I've never climbed anything like this." Daniel studied the rock. His mind automatically divided the ascent into sections. Anchor point, traverse, vertical crack, rest ledge, another anchor. Years after leaving the Navy, mission planning still came naturally. He pointed toward a cluster of twisted juniper trees growing from the cliff. "We use those." Emily followed his finger. "They'll hold." Daniel nodded. "If their roots go deep enough." Atlas wandered several yards along the canyon wall. His nose worked steadily. Then he returned. Instead of climbing higher, he sat, looking directly at Daniel, almost waiting for permission. Daniel clipped the first climbing rope into his harness. "You ready, partner?" Atlas stood immediately. Emily laughed softly. "I've never seen a dog answer a question before. He answers the important ones." The first section of the climb proved easier than expected. Large shelves allowed them to gain nearly 40 feet. Then the cliff changed. Smooth sandstone rose almost vertically. Daniel hammered the first piton into a narrow crack. The metallic echo bounced through the canyon. The sharp sound hit him unexpectedly. His breathing faltered. Another strike, another echo. For one terrible instant, the canyon vanished. Concrete walls, smoke, radio static, someone shouting coordinates. The ringing of steel became distant explosions rolling through narrow streets. Daniel froze. His grip tightened on the rope. His breathing became fast. Atlas reacted immediately. The German shepherd climbed onto the narrow ledge beside him with surprising agility. Carefully, deliberately. He pressed his shoulder against Daniel's leg. Solid. Warm. Real. Daniel closed his eyes. He felt coarse dog fur beneath his fingers. Not tactical gloves. Not rubble. Not war. Just Atlas. After several long breaths, the flashback faded. Emily remained below, saying nothing. She understood enough not to rush him. Finally, Daniel opened his eyes. "I'm okay." Emily simply nodded. "Take your time. No pity. No judgment. Only patience." Daniel looked at her gratefully. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not asking." She smiled gently. "My brother came home with nightmares too." Silence settled between them. A different kind of understanding had formed, one built without explanation. They climbed another 30 feet. The stagecoach now loomed directly above them. Its weathered timbers seemed almost suspended in time. Sunlight illuminated faded black paint still clinging stubbornly to sections of the driver's compartment. Atlas suddenly stopped again. His ears pointed toward the coach. A low whine escaped his throat. Daniel followed his gaze. The front axle wasn't broken. It rested perfectly against a natural stone shelf. Not wedged by accident. Supported. Almost positioned. Emily reached the same conclusion. "Daniel, I know. This didn't crash here." He nodded slowly. "Someone hit it." A cool breeze swept through the canyon. The ancient coach creaked softly against the rock, as though answering. Neither of them noticed. Far below, hidden behind a stand of pine trees at the mouth of the canyon, a pair of binoculars reflected a brief flash of sunlight. Someone else had followed them into the mountains, and whoever it was, had no intention of letting history remain uncovered. Far below the canyon rim, hidden behind a cluster of wind-twisted pines, the unknown observer lowered a pair of binoculars. He remained motionless for another minute, watching Daniel Mercer and Dr. Emily Carter continue their climb toward the century-old stagecoach. Then he quietly stepped backward. Boot prints disappeared into the damp forest floor. Moments later, the distant sound of an engine echoed through the valley before fading into the mountains. Neither Daniel nor Emily heard it. Their entire world had narrowed to the cliff in front of them. The final stretch demanded every ounce of concentration. The sandstone became brittle beneath their boots, breaking away without warning. Daniel climbed first, driving steel pitons into narrow cracks while Emily carefully secured the ropes below. Atlas followed with astonishing confidence, placing each paw exactly where Daniel had stepped moments before. The old German shepherd had crossed combat zones years earlier. A mountain cliff did not frighten him. After another 20 exhausting minutes, Daniel finally reached the narrow ledge supporting the stagecoach. He pulled himself over the final rock shelf and slowly stood. The wind met him first. Cold, steady, carrying the scent of ancient timber and wet stone. Emily climbed onto the ledge seconds later, breathing hard from the effort. Neither of them spoke. The stagecoach stood only a few feet away. For 100 years, it had remained untouched by human hands. Up close, it seemed less like a vehicle and more like a forgotten monument. Its heavy oak frame had weathered into shades of gray and silver. Iron braces were stained orange with rust, while faded black paint clung stubbornly to protected corners beneath the roofline. Torn leather curtains fluttered softly in the mountain breeze. Across the driver's door, barely visible beneath layers of dust and age, a few faded gold letters remained. Bear Creek. Daniel slowly brushed away loose dirt with the sleeve of his jacket. Stage line, he whispered. Emily looked at him. It really is the Silver Creek Stagecoach. Neither of them smiled. The moment felt too sacred for celebration. Atlas stepped cautiously onto the ledge. His nose immediately began working. Unlike the humans, he showed almost no interest in the stagecoach itself. Instead, he circled it once, then again. His pace slowed. Daniel watched carefully. "What do you smell?" Atlas ignored the question. He moved toward the driver's seat, sniffed briefly, then continued around the rear axle. Again. Nothing. Finally, he stopped beneath the driver's platform. The old dog lowered his head. His breathing became faster. Then he began scratching furiously at the packed dirt and hardened mud beneath the coach. Emily frowned. "What's he doing?" Daniel knelt beside Atlas. "I don't know." The German shepherd refused to stop. His powerful paws scattered loose gravel across the ledge. Small stones bounced into the canyon below. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound echoed through the quiet mountain air. Daniel reached down to clear away the loosened dirt by hand. His fingers struck something solid. Metal. He paused. Emily crouched beside him. "What is it?" Daniel brushed away another layer of mud. Slowly, an iron plate emerged beneath decades of hardened earth. It was perfectly rectangular, far too precise to be part of the natural rock. Emily leaned closer. "That wasn't exposed by the landslide." Daniel shook his head. "No." Atlas gave another impatient bark, almost as if urging them to continue. Together they cleared away more debris. The plate measured roughly 18 inches across and had been fitted flush beneath the driver's platform. 4 square-headed bolts secured it tightly in place, but something immediately caught Daniel's attention. There. Emily followed his finger. One bolt looked newer than the others. Not modern, simply less weathered. "As if someone replaced it," Emily murmured. Daniel nodded. "Long after the coach got here." Silence settled over the ledge. If someone had repaired the plate. Someone had reached this stagecoach after it disappeared. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. Daniel removed a small multi-tool from his backpack. The bolts refused to move. 100 years of rust held them firmly in place. Emily unpacked a small geological hammer from her climbing bag. "Try this." Working carefully, Daniel chipped away layers of corrosion surrounding each bolt. Minutes passed. Atlas remained beside him the entire time, watching every movement. Finally, one bolt turned, just enough. Daniel smiled. "We're getting somewhere." Another 10 minutes passed before all 4 bolts loosened. He gripped the edges of the iron plate. It wouldn't budge. Emily placed both hands beside his. Together, they pulled. At first, nothing. Then a loud metallic crack echoed across the canyon. The plate lifted several inches before stopping abruptly. Something beneath it blocked the movement. Daniel carefully raised it higher. A gasp escaped Emily. Hidden beneath the iron cover was not empty space. Instead, a circular brass fitting had been built directly into the wooden frame of the stagecoach. Unlike the rusted iron surrounding it, the brass still reflected faint golden light beneath years of tarnish. Its craftsmanship was extraordinary. Tiny engraved lines formed an intricate pattern around the outer edge. At the very center, a keyhole. Daniel stared silently. Emily reached out but stopped herself before touching it. "This," she whispered, "was never meant to be found." Atlas lowered his nose toward the brass mechanism. Instead of scratching again, he sat quietly beside it, almost respectfully. Daniel examined the lock more closely. "No damage." Emily nodded. "No one's forced it open. So whoever hid this had the key." Neither spoke for several moments. The mountain breeze carried only the distant cry of a hawk circling high above the canyon. Daniel finally leaned back against the cliff. "The gold." Emily looked at him. "You still think that's what's inside?" He studied the ancient lock. "I don't know anymore." She slowly smiled. "I don't think you ever really cared about the gold." Daniel considered the question. She was right. Money could buy a house, maybe a truck, maybe a chance to stop sleeping beneath bridges. But something else had drawn him here, something harder to explain. Truth. Purpose. A mission worth finishing. Atlas suddenly stood. His ears snapped upright. Daniel noticed instantly. "What is it?" The German shepherd faced the canyon entrance. His posture changed completely. Every muscle became tense, listening, watching. Daniel scanned the valley below. Nothing moved. Only endless forest stretching toward distant ranchlands. Still, years of working beside Atlas had taught him never to ignore that look. Someone had been there, or still was. Emily quietly followed his gaze. "You think we're alone?" Daniel answered without taking his eyes off the trees. "I don't know." Atlas released a low, steady growl. The first growl Daniel had heard since they entered the mountains. Not fear. Warning. Daniel slowly covered the brass lock with the iron plate once again. "We're done for today." Emily looked surprised. "We're leaving?" "We found enough." She hesitated. "But..." Daniel looked at Atlas. "My partner doesn't make mistakes." Without another argument, Emily helped secure the plate exactly as they had found it. Nothing about the stagecoach appeared disturbed. The secret remained hidden. For now, as the three of them carefully began descending the mountain, neither Daniel nor Emily noticed a dark pickup parked nearly 2 miles away on a Forest Service road. Inside, Garrett Holloway quietly studied photographs that had just arrived on his phone. One image showed Daniel kneeling beneath the driver's platform. Another showed Atlas digging through the mud. Garrett slowly locked the screen. His expression remained calm, but his eyes revealed something colder than anger. Fear. Because for the first time in his life, the Holloway family secret was no longer buried beneath the mountain. It had found a soldier, and a dog who refused to stop digging. Daniel Mercer barely spoke during the drive back to Silver Hollow. The old pickup bounced over washboard roads as the late afternoon sun painted the San Juan Mountains in shades of amber and crimson. Emily Carter sat quietly behind the wheel, respecting the silence. Atlas rested in the back seat, though every few minutes he would lift his head and glance toward the mountains disappearing behind them, as if unwilling to leave the stagecoach alone. The brass lock stayed in Daniel's thoughts. Not the gold. The lock. Someone had hidden it with extraordinary care. Someone had wanted it to survive a century. That meant whatever lay behind it had always been more valuable than the stagecoach itself. As they entered town, Emily finally spoke. My grandfather repaired antique clocks. Daniel looked over. He used to say the same thing every time someone brought him a broken one. What was that? If someone builds a hidden compartment, she smiled faintly. It's never to hide something ordinary. Daniel stared through the windshield. I've been thinking the same thing. Emily pulled into the parking lot behind her veterinary clinic. We'll need better tools. Daniel nodded. And more time. She unlocked an old storage shed behind the clinic. Inside hung decades of climbing equipment, restoration tools, portable work lights, hand winches, and weatherproof cases carefully stacked on shelves. My brother kept everything. She lifted a heavy steel toolbox. He hated throwing anything away. Daniel examined its contents. Precision screwdrivers, fine picks, miniature chisels, old locksmith files. His eyes paused. These might work. Emily smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Atlas wandered through the shed, sniffing every corner before settling near the open doorway. His watch never ended. Daniel noticed the dog's posture, always facing outward, always guarding. Some instincts never retired. By dawn the next morning, they were climbing once again. Mist drifted through the canyon, softening the sharp edges of the cliffs, while golden sunlight slowly crept down the towering sandstone walls. The mountain seemed strangely peaceful, almost welcoming. Daniel wasn't fooled. Mountains never stopped being dangerous. They only became quieter. The climb went faster this time. Their ropes remained in place from the previous day. Each anchor held firm. Each piton remained exactly where Daniel had driven it. Only one thing felt different. Atlas climbed ahead, not beside Daniel, ahead, as though he already knew where they needed to go. When they finally stepped onto the narrow ledge, the ancient stagecoach waited exactly as they had left it, silent, motionless, patient. Daniel immediately removed the iron plate. The brass lock gleamed softly beneath the morning light. Emily unpacked the locksmith tools. You think it's still functional? Daniel ran one fingertip across the tarnished brass. If they built it well enough to survive 100 years, he looked up. They built it to open. He selected the thinnest pick from the kit. Carefully, he inserted it into the keyhole. Nothing. Another tool. Still nothing. Emily knelt beside him. Try listening. Daniel looked puzzled. My grandfather never watched the lock. She tapped her own ear. He listened to it. Daniel smiled. Never thought I'd be taking locksmith advice on a mountain. Neither did I. He closed his eyes, inserted another pick, turned it slowly. Tiny metallic clicks echoed beneath his fingertips. 1, 2, 3. The mechanism was astonishingly smooth, almost untouched by rust. Someone had sealed it perfectly. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. Neither Daniel nor Emily noticed the passing time. Only Atlas remained aware of everything beyond the stagecoach. Watching, listening, guarding. Suddenly, click. The sound was barely louder than a heartbeat. Daniel stopped moving. Emily held her breath. Did you? He nodded. I heard it. Carefully. Very carefully. Daniel turned the brass cylinder. Another click. Then a dull, mechanical thump echoed from somewhere deep inside the coach. The floor beneath the driver's bench shifted slightly. Emily gasped. Daniel slowly lifted the weathered wooden panel. Hidden beneath it lay a lead-lined compartment built directly into the frame of the stagecoach. The air escaping from inside carried the dry scent of ancient leather and old paper. Neither moved. History rested only inches away. Daniel reached inside first. His hands emerged holding a heavy canvas sack. The fabric had darkened with age but remained intact. He loosened the drawstring. Golden coins spilled into his palm. Not dozens, hundreds. Morning sunlight reflected across their weathered surfaces, filling the small compartment with warm flashes of light. Emily stared silently. The legend. Daniel looked at the coins. Was true. But before either could speak again, Atlas barked. Once. Sharp. Insistent. Daniel looked toward him. The dog wasn't staring at the gold. He stared into the compartment. His nose pointed toward something lying beneath the canvas bags. Daniel carefully removed 2 more sacks, then another. Finally, his fingers touched oilskin. Unlike the bags of gold, this package had been wrapped with extraordinary care. Waxed cloth, leather straps, multiple layers protecting it from moisture. Daniel slowly lifted it free. It weighed surprisingly little. Emily whispered, "Open it." Daniel loosened the brittle straps. Inside rested a leather-bound ledger. Its cover remained remarkably well preserved beneath the oilskin. Embossed across the front in faded gold lettering were 4 simple words. United States Army Payroll. Daniel exchanged a puzzled glance with Emily. This wasn't hidden for the gold. He carefully opened the first page. Names, dates, shipment records. The handwriting remained beautifully legible despite the passing century. Emily leaned closer. This is official. Daniel turned another page, then another. Each listed military payroll deliveries to isolated frontier forts. Nothing unusual. Until page 14. His eyes stopped. A second style of handwriting appeared. Not military. Private. Beneath several shipment records, someone had added handwritten notes. Transferred. Diverted. Delivered elsewhere. No authorization. Emily frowned. That's impossible. Daniel continued reading. The notes became more detailed. Payments. Land transfers. Private agreements. Signatures. One surname appeared again, and again, and again. Holloway. Daniel's pulse quickened. He turned another page. There, attached with yellowed ribbon, rested copies of signed correspondence between frontier businessmen discussing payroll shipments before they disappeared. One sentence froze both of them. Payment received in exchange for permanent silence regarding the Silver Creek transfer. Signed, Edmund Holloway, Garrett Holloway's great-grandfather. Emily slowly sat back against the stagecoach wheel. Oh my God. Daniel remained motionless. The gold no longer mattered. Not now. Not after this. This isn't stolen treasure. He spoke almost to himself. It's evidence. He turned another page. More signatures, more transactions. Land purchases completed only weeks after the stagecoach vanished. Families forced to sell. Ranches changing ownership. The beginning of an empire. Built not on hard work, but on betrayal. Daniel quietly closed the ledger. Neither spoke for several long moments. The mountain breeze whispered through broken boards overhead. Atlas walked over and rested his head gently against Daniel's shoulder. Daniel rubbed the old dog's neck. You knew. Atlas blinked slowly, as though he'd understood all along that the mountain had been protecting something far greater than gold. Far below the canyon, a dark pickup appeared once more along the distant forest road. Its driver raised binoculars toward the cliff. watching, waiting, and realizing with growing horror that Daniel Mercer was no longer searching for treasure. He was carrying enough truth to destroy an entire family legacy. Neither Daniel nor Emily realized they were being watched. The afternoon sun had begun its slow descent behind the western ridges, stretching long shadows across the canyon. The air, warm only an hour before, suddenly carried a sharp chill that rolled down from the higher peaks. Daniel looked toward the horizon. The weather's changing. Emily followed his gaze. Dark clouds were gathering again, not drifting, building, fast. Atlas lifted his head from Daniel's shoulder and walked to the edge of the ledge. His ears stood rigid as he studied the valley below. The old German shepherd inhaled deeply, then released a low, uneasy whine. Daniel had learned long ago to trust that sound. "We're leaving." Emily looked at the open compartment beneath the driver's seat. "The gold? We're not carrying any of it." She looked surprised. "Not even one bag?" Daniel carefully wrapped the Army payroll ledger inside its oilskin covering before sliding it into his backpack. "The documents matter more." He looked once at the untouched canvas sacks. "They've waited 100 years. His voice remained calm. "They can wait another day." Emily nodded. She understood. Without another word, they carefully lowered the wooden panel back into place, locked the hidden compartment, and secured the iron plate exactly as they had found it. When they stepped away, the ancient stagecoach looked untouched once again. Its greatest secrets remained hidden inside the mountain. For now. The first raindrops struck the canyon wall before they had descended 20 feet. At first they were scattered, cold, heavy. Then the sky opened. Rain poured down in solid sheets, instantly soaking the sandstone cliffs. Water rushed through cracks in the rock, creating dozens of temporary waterfalls that cascaded past the stagecoach. Daniel clipped another safety line into the anchor. "We move one at a time." Emily tightened her helmet. "You first." He shook his head. "You." She hesitated. "What if, I'll be right behind you." Atlas waited calmly beside Daniel. Even now, after all the years they had worked together, the old dog never abandoned his position until Daniel gave the signal. Emily began descending. Her boots searched carefully for footholds as the rock became increasingly slick. Daniel watched every movement. Slow. She nodded. "I've got it." Lightning flashed across the canyon. Almost instantly, thunder rolled through the mountain winds with enough force to shake loose small stones from the cliffs above. Daniel felt the familiar tightening in his chest. The sound, the vibration, the sudden pressure in the air. For the briefest moment, the canyon disappeared. A convoy, an explosion. Radio calls breaking apart beneath static. Someone shouting his name. Atlas immediately pressed against his leg. Solid, warm, present. Daniel took one slow breath, then another. The mountains returned. He rested one hand briefly on Atlas's neck. "I'm here." The old dog blinked. Ready, always ready. They resumed the descent. Halfway down the cliff, another crack echoed across the valley. This one wasn't thunder. Daniel looked upstream. The narrow creek that had wound quietly through the canyon floor only hours earlier had transformed into a fast-moving torrent. Rainwater from the upper elevations was arriving. Fast. Too fast. Flash flood. His eyes searched instinctively. Then he saw them. Nearly 300 yards downstream, an old wooden footbridge connected two hiking trails across the swollen creek. A family stood stranded on the far side. A father struggled to steady himself against the railing while a woman clutched the hands of two frightened children. The bridge groaned. One support beam snapped. The entire structure lurched violently. Emily saw them at the same moment. Oh no. The father looked toward the canyon walls. He spotted Daniel. His desperate wave needed no words. Daniel reached the bottom of the cliff. His military training took over before conscious thought could catch up. Emily. She was already unclipping ropes. I know, we have 200 feet of static line and 3 harnesses. Daniel looked toward Atlas. The German shepherd was already running, without command, without hesitation. Straight toward the damaged bridge. The old dog leaped across fallen rocks, splashed through shallow channels, and disappeared into heavy rain. Daniel smiled despite the danger. He already has the plan. They reached the creek minutes later. The water had become a roaring wall of brown current, carrying broken branches, rocks, and entire tree trunks downstream. The bridge shuddered again. One of the children began crying. The mother's voice trembled. Please! Daniel immediately anchored the climbing rope around the thick trunk of a ponderosa pine. Emily secured the second anchor farther back. We can't cross, she shouted over the rushing water. No. Daniel looked downstream. But Atlas can. The German shepherd appeared from the trees, carrying the free end of a lightweight guide rope, clipped securely to his tactical harness. Daniel knelt beside him. You ready, partner? Atlas stared directly at the terrified family. His tail remained still, focused. Daniel unclipped one side of the guide rope. Take it. With one gentle pat across Atlas's shoulder, he pointed toward the opposite bank. Go. Atlas launched forward. The old shepherd bounded across rocks barely visible beneath the rushing water. At one point, the current knocked him sideways, but he regained his footing almost instantly. The family watched in astonishment as the dog reached them. The father grabbed the guide rope attached to Atlas's harness. Daniel secured the opposite end. We've got them. Working together, Daniel and Emily created a temporary safety line stretching across the torrent. One child at a time. That was the only way. Emily fitted the youngest girl into a climbing sling. The father clipped her securely onto the rope. Daniel braced himself. Send her. The child slid slowly across the raging creek. Halfway through, another surge of water slammed against the line. The rope jerked violently. The little girl screamed. Atlas reacted instantly. The German shepherd plunged into the freezing water below, swimming beside her while barking encouragement until Daniel pulled both safely onto shore. Emily wrapped the trembling child inside a blanket. You're safe. The little girl buried her face against Atlas's soaked fur. The old dog simply stood there, shivering quietly. One by one, they brought the remaining child across. Then the mother. Only the father remained. As he clipped himself onto the rope, another deafening crack split the air. Daniel looked up. A section of the canyon wall had broken free. Move! The father pushed away from the collapsing bridge just as rocks crashed into the torrent behind him. One large boulder struck the remaining bridge supports. The structure disappeared into the flood. A spray of shattered timber exploded across the creek. One jagged branch hurtled toward the youngest child. Atlas lunged. The branch struck the old shepherd across his left shoulder instead. He yelped once, then immediately stood again. The child remained unharmed. Daniel's heart dropped. Atlas! The German shepherd limped only one step before regaining his balance. Rain mixed with blood beneath his thick fur. Emily was already kneeling beside him. He took the hit. Daniel gently rested both hands against Atlas's face. You stubborn old soldier. Atlas responded by licking Daniel's wrist once, as though reassuring him. I'm still here. Only after every member of the family stood safely together beneath the shelter of towering pines did Daniel look back toward the mountain. High above the canyon, hidden behind rain and mist, the Silver Creek stagecoach had vanished from sight once more. The gold remained where they had left it. The ledger remained locked safely inside Daniel's backpack. But none of it mattered in that moment. 5 strangers were alive, because one homeless veteran, one determined veterinarian, and one aging military dog had chosen people over treasure. None of them realized that before sunrise, the rescue would make headlines across Silver Hollow, and somewhere in town, Garrett Holloway would decide that saving lives made Daniel Mercer far more dangerous than finding gold ever could. Rain continued through most of the night. By the time the rescue vehicles reached the washed-out canyon road, the storm had already begun moving east, leaving behind a sky washed clean and mountains gleaming beneath the first pale light of dawn. Daniel sat on the tailgate of an emergency truck while Dr. Emily Carter carefully cleaned Atlas's injured shoulder. The old German shepherd never whimpered. He watched Daniel instead. Always Daniel. Emily clipped away the wet fur surrounding the wound. The branch cut deep, she said quietly, but it missed the joint. Daniel finally released the breath he'd been holding. So he'll recover? Emily smiled. He'll carry another scar. She looked at Atlas. But I don't think scars bother him much. Daniel gently rested his forehead against Atlas's. They never did. The youngest child they had rescued slowly approached, wrapped in an oversized sheriff's blanket. She couldn't have been older than 8. In her small hands, she carried a faded blue ribbon that had come loose from her backpack during the rescue. She knelt beside Atlas. I think this belongs to a hero. Very carefully, she tied the ribbon around the dog's collar. Atlas blinked once before gently licking her hand. The girl's mother wiped tears from her face. I don't know how we'll ever thank you. Daniel shook his head. You already did. She looked confused. My family gets to go home. His voice remained calm. That's enough. The sheriff, Bill Carson, walked over carrying a steaming paper cup. I've been doing search and rescue in these mountains for 22 years. He handed Daniel the coffee. I've never seen anyone build a rope rescue that fast. Daniel accepted the cup. I had a good team. Sheriff Carson looked toward Atlas. I'd say you had 2. For the first time in many years, Daniel felt something unfamiliar. Not pride, not relief, respect, not because of what people were saying, because Atlas was still standing beside him. By mid-morning, news had spread throughout Silver Hollow. The rescued family happened to be visitors from Denver. The father owned a regional construction company. The mother served on the board of a Veterans Outreach Foundation. Before noon, photographs of the rescue were appearing on local television stations. None of them showed the stagecoach. Only the homeless veteran, the aging military dog, and the terrified family they had carried out of the flood. Inside Ruby's diner, the same tables that had echoed with laughter only 2 days earlier had fallen strangely quiet. Old ranchers watched the television mounted above the counter. Former Navy SEAL Daniel Mercer, retired military K-9 Atlas, rescued an entire family despite dangerous flash flooding. Coffee cups paused halfway to weathered lips. Someone finally spoke. That's the fellow everybody's been making jokes about. Another man slowly removed his hat. I guess we were wrong. Walter Morrison quietly stirred his coffee. I tried telling you, boys. Nobody answered. Across the street, Garrett Holloway stood inside his office watching the same broadcast. The reporter smiled warmly into the camera. Witnesses credit the remarkable German shepherd with carrying the first rescue line across the flooded creek. Garrett muted the television. His jaw tightened. Everything was changing. Daniel Mercer was no longer just the homeless veteran people dismissed whenever he spoke. Now people listened. Heroes were dangerous. Heroes were believed. His phone buzzed. One of the men he'd hired to quietly monitor the canyon sent a short message. They found something under the driver's seat. Garrett stared at the screen. His expression remained perfectly controlled. Only the tightening grip around the phone betrayed his thoughts. "So," he whispered. They opened it. He walked toward the old cabinet hidden behind his bookshelf. Removing one leather journal, he turned directly to a page marked decades earlier. His grandfather's handwriting remained dark and deliberate. "If anyone discovers the ledger, destroy the evidence before it reaches a courtroom." Garrett quietly closed the journal. "No." His voice was barely audible. "I won't let everything disappear because of one dog." Back at Emily's veterinary clinic, Atlas rested on a padded blanket beneath the examination room window. Fresh bandages wrapped his shoulder. Daniel sat nearby in an old wooden chair. For nearly 20 minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, Emily entered carrying 2 bowls. One held soup. The other contained warm chicken and rice. Atlas immediately looked interested. Daniel laughed softly. "I guess that's a good sign." Emily set the bowl in front of Atlas. His appetite never left. Atlas carefully waited. Only after Daniel nodded did he begin eating. Emily noticed. "He still waits for permission. He always will." Daniel watched the old shepherd. "Military working dogs don't really retire." Emily leaned against the counter. "Neither do Navy SEALs." Daniel smiled without humor. "Sometimes I wish we could." Silence filled the room again. Outside, autumn leaves drifted across the parking lot. Emily finally broke the quiet. "My father volunteered with veterans after he retired." Daniel looked up. "He told me something once." "What?" "He said the hardest battle isn't coming home." She folded her arms. "It's believing you deserve to." Daniel stared through the window. For years he had avoided answering that question. Did he deserve another life? Another purpose? Another chance? Atlas finished eating. Instead of lying back down, he slowly walked across the room despite the bandage. He rested his head gently in Daniel's lap. Daniel scratched behind his ears. "I think he already answered." Emily smiled. "I think so too." Later that afternoon, Sheriff Carson arrived carrying a sealed evidence envelope. "I wanted to thank you properly." Daniel looked surprised. "You already did." The sheriff shook his head. "No." He handed Daniel the envelope. "Inside is the official incident report." Daniel frowned. "What do I need this for?" Carson smiled. "In case anybody ever questions what happened." He looked directly at Daniel. There were 23 witnesses. Daniel understood immediately. His rescue was no longer a story. It was documented fact. His word carried weight now. Before leaving, Sheriff Carson paused beside Atlas. "I heard folks talking about some old stagecoach." Daniel remained silent. The sheriff smiled knowingly. "I've worked enough years to know when a man isn't ready to tell the whole story." He tipped his hat. "When you are." He looked at both Daniel and Emily. "I'll listen." That evening, the three of them returned to the old railroad bridge. The sky had cleared completely. Stars slowly emerged above the mountains. Daniel unfolded the army ledger beneath the glow of a small lantern. Emily carefully turned another page. Every line revealed another transaction, another payment, another land transfer. The pattern had become impossible to ignore. The Holloways didn't just steal gold, Emily whispered. They stole people's futures. Daniel nodded. And this proves it. Atlas suddenly lifted his head. The old shepherd wasn't looking at the ledger. He stared into the darkness beyond the bridge. His ears stood rigid. Daniel quietly closed the book. What is it, partner? Atlas released one low growl. Not loud, just enough. Daniel stood. Years of instinct returned instantly. Someone was there, hidden somewhere beyond the trees, watching. The footsteps retreated almost immediately, too soft for Emily to hear, not too soft for Atlas. Daniel walked only as far as the edge of the bridge. The darkness revealed nothing, only moonlit cottonwoods swaying gently in the night breeze. Whoever had been there was already gone. Daniel returned to the fire. Emily looked at him. You think it has something to do with the stagecoach? Daniel slowly nodded. I don't think we're the only ones who know what's inside. High above Silver Hollow, a pair of headlights disappeared along a winding mountain road. Inside the truck, Garrett Holloway drove without turning on the radio. His mind had already made its decision. If Daniel Mercer would not abandon the truth, then the truth itself would have to disappear. And before the week was over, the mountains would become a battlefield once again. The first frost settled across Silver Hollow before sunrise. Thin crystals clung to the tall grass outside the abandoned railroad bridge, sparkling beneath the pale blue light of dawn. The valley looked peaceful again, as if the storm and the rescue had been nothing more than a passing dream. Daniel Mercer knew better. He stood beside a small camp stove, warming coffee while Atlas quietly patrolled the edge of the clearing. The old German shepherd's shoulder remained bandaged, but he refused to rest for long. Every few minutes he disappeared among the cottonwoods before returning to Daniel's side. Emily arrived just after sunrise. She climbed out of her pickup carrying fresh medical supplies and another waterproof case. How's our patient? Daniel looked toward Atlas. He thinks he's perfectly fine. Emily laughed softly. I expected that. Atlas walked over without hesitation. Emily carefully checked the bandage. The wound looks clean. She gently ran her fingers around the injury. No infection. Daniel released a quiet breath. So he's cleared? For easy walks. She smiled. Not mountain expeditions. Atlas looked from Emily to Daniel. His ears lifted. Daniel chuckled. I don't think he agrees. The dog gave a single wag of his tail. For a brief moment, the weight of everything they had discovered seemed to fade. Then Daniel unfolded the Army payroll ledger across the hood of Emily's truck. Morning sunlight illuminated the faded ink. Emily pointed toward one page she had marked the night before. Look here. Daniel leaned closer. Several payments appeared beside the names of ranch families from nearly a century earlier. Each payment was followed by the same handwritten notation. Property transferred, owner relocated, claim surrendered. Daniel frowned. They weren't buying land. Emily nodded slowly. They were forcing people off it. Daniel turned another page. The pattern repeated again and again. Entire valleys, mining claims, cattle ranches, small farms, all quietly absorbed into one growing land empire. The Holloway name appeared beside nearly every transfer. Daniel closed the ledger. This belongs with federal investigators. Emily nodded. But first, she looked toward the mountains. We need to document everything at the Stagecoach. Daniel agreed. The ledger proves motive. He tapped the book gently. The coach proves it existed. Within an hour, they were climbing back toward the canyon. The sky overhead was bright and cloudless. Autumn sunlight poured through the pine forest, filling the mountain air with the scent of cedar and fallen leaves. Atlas led once again. Despite the healing wound, he moved with steady confidence. Occasionally he paused to sniff the breeze before continuing higher. Daniel noticed. He's checking something. Emily looked around. For what? I don't know yet. The trail felt different, not because of the weather, because of the silence. Birdsong had vanished. Even the squirrels that usually darted across fallen logs were nowhere to be seen. Daniel slowed his pace. Years of training whispered the same warning. Something had disturbed the woods. Halfway to the canyon, Atlas stopped abruptly. The German shepherd lowered his nose toward the trail. He sniffed once, twice, then turned sharply into the trees. Daniel followed. Several yards from the main path, fresh boot prints crossed the damp soil. Emily crouched beside them. Those aren't ours. Daniel measured them with his eyes. 3 people. You can tell that? Different tread patterns. He pointed carefully. One heavier than the others. Emily looked impressed. Daniel remained focused. They passed through after yesterday's frost. So, they're recent. Atlas continued following the scent uphill. Daniel hesitated. They weren't hiking. Emily looked at him. How do you know? He pointed toward a snapped branch nearly shoulder height. They were carrying something long. She studied the broken limb. Rifles? Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. The farther they climbed, the more signs appeared. Fresh cigarette ash, a crushed water bottle, boot prints leading directly toward the hidden canyon. Someone else had reached the mountain. When they finally emerged at the landslide, Daniel stopped so suddenly that Emily nearly walked into him. The climbing ropes were gone. Every anchor, every piton, every length of static line. Gone. Emily stared upward. They took everything. Daniel's jaw tightened. They don't want us getting back up. Atlas barked sharply. He sprinted toward the base of the cliff. Daniel ran after him. The old dog stopped beside a broken carabiner, half buried beneath loose gravel. Daniel picked it up. The aluminum gate had been cut clean through. Not broken. Cut. Emily looked at it. Bolt cutters. Daniel nodded. They came prepared. Atlas suddenly growled. Not toward the cliff. Toward the forest. Daniel reacted instantly. Down. Emily dropped behind a boulder without questioning him. Daniel crouched beside Atlas. Silence. Wind moved gently through the pines. Then, a pebble rolled down the opposite hillside. Someone was there. Daniel spoke quietly. We're not alone. Atlas's ears tracked movement Daniel still couldn't see. Another sound. A branch snapping. Then complete silence. Emily whispered, "What do we do?" Daniel looked around the canyon. No cover if they start moving. He reached into his pocket. His phone showed one weak bar of service. Barely enough. He quickly texted Sheriff Bill Carson. Need help. Unknown men at Silver Creek Canyon. Destroyed climbing gear. His finger hovered. Message failed. No signal. He exhaled slowly. Atlas suddenly lunged sideways. Almost at the exact same moment, a large rock crashed down onto the ground where Daniel had been kneeling seconds earlier. Emily gasped. The stone shattered against the canyon floor. Daniel looked uphill. A dark figure disappeared behind a pine tree. They're trying to scare us off. Emily's heartbeat thundered in her ears, or worse. Daniel's expression hardened. No. They had a clear shot. He glanced toward the broken rock. They wanted us to leave. Atlas barked furiously now, pulling against Daniel's grip. The old shepherd had locked onto the scent. Daniel gently rested one hand against the dog's neck. Not yet. The growling stopped immediately. Years of partnership required no further command. Daniel looked toward Emily. We leave. She looked surprised. What about the coach? We come back. He kept his eyes on the trees. But we don't walk into someone else's plan. They began backing away carefully, never turning their backs on the forest. Atlas walked behind them instead of leading, repeatedly looking over his shoulder, protecting their retreat. Only after they reached the lower trail did Daniel allow himself to breathe normally again. Emily looked at him. You knew exactly what to do. Daniel stared toward the mountains. No. His voice was quiet. I knew exactly what not to do. She understood. Years earlier, he might have chased whoever was hiding above them. The man standing beside her had learned that survival sometimes meant restraint. Back in Silver Hollow, Sheriff Bill Carson listened carefully as Daniel described everything they had found. The destroyed climbing gear, the boot prints, the falling rock. The sheriff's expression darkened. I'll send deputies. Daniel shook his head. They'll need climbing equipment. Carson nodded. And backup. He looked toward Atlas. That dog probably saved both your lives. Daniel smiled faintly. He usually does. Meanwhile, inside his office overlooking the valley, Garrett Holloway received a short phone call. They left? Yes. They see us? No. Garrett stood silently for several moments. Then he walked to the window overlooking Silver Hollow. The stagecoach remained hidden, for now. But Daniel Mercer had proven something Garrett could no longer ignore. The homeless veteran wasn't chasing fortune. He was protecting evidence. And that made him an enemy Garrett could no longer afford to underestimate. Far beneath the fading evening light, Atlas rested his head on Daniel's boot outside the sheriff's office. His eyes remained fixed on the mountains, as if he knew. The greatest secret of Silver Creek had not yet been uncovered. It was still waiting beneath the stone, waiting for him. The next morning broke clear and cold over the San Juan Mountains. A hard frost covered every pine needle and blade of grass around Silver Hollow. The previous day's tension lingered in the air, but the sky itself looked innocent, painted in brilliant shades of blue that only appeared after autumn storms had scrubbed the atmosphere clean. Sheriff Bill Carson stood beside two county deputies near the trailhead leading toward Silver Creek Canyon. I've got men watching the access roads, he told Daniel. No one goes near that mountain without us knowing. Daniel adjusted the straps of his backpack. That'll help. But? Daniel glanced toward the peaks. If someone wanted to destroy evidence, they already had the chance. The sheriff nodded slowly. And they didn't. They wanted us gone. Emily Carter joined them carrying several hard plastic evidence cases, which means whatever they're protecting is probably still there. Sheriff Carson looked at the old German shepherd sitting calmly beside Daniel. Atlas's injured shoulder had healed enough for careful movement. Fresh bandages remained beneath his thick coat, but his eyes were bright and alert. The sheriff smiled. I suppose our best tracker is ready. Daniel scratched behind Atlas's ears. He never stopped being ready. Together they hiked toward the canyon. This time they carried cameras, measuring tools, evidence bags, and climbing equipment supplied by the county search and rescue team. Every important step was photographed. Every boot print was documented. The mountain no longer belonged only to legends. It had become a crime scene. As they approached the landslide, Daniel immediately noticed something different. The forest felt alive again. Birdsong drifted through the trees. Chipmunks darted across fallen logs. Whatever presence had unsettled the wilderness the previous day was gone. Sheriff Carson examined the cut-climbing hardware still lying beneath the cliff. Professional tools. He held up the damaged carabiner. No accident. Daniel nodded. They wanted to delay us. Emily looked toward the stagecoach high above the canyon wall. They failed. Within an hour, a new climbing system had been installed. County rescue specialists remained below while Daniel, Emily, and Atlas climbed toward the ancient coach once more. Every movement felt strangely familiar now. The sandstone, the narrow ledges, the whispering wind. The stagecoach greeted them exactly as before. Silent, weathered, patient. Daniel carefully uncovered the hidden compartment again. The canvas sacks remained untouched. The Army payroll ledger rested exactly where he had left it. Sheriff Carson photographed every page before sealing the ledger inside a protective evidence sleeve. Emily carefully labeled each bag of gold without removing a single coin. Everything stays exactly where we found it. Daniel nodded. No shortcuts. Hours passed, documenting every detail. By early afternoon, the compartment had been fully recorded. Sheriff Carson looked satisfied. I think we've got enough. Daniel closed the hidden floor panel. So do I. Atlas, however, had other ideas. The old German shepherd suddenly walked away from the stagecoach. Not toward the ropes, not toward Daniel. He crossed the narrow ledge until he reached the far end of the exposed rock shelf overlooking the canyon. Then he stopped. His nose swept slowly across the ground. Emily watched him. What's he doing? Daniel smiled faintly. Working. Atlas began sniffing along the cliff face with intense concentration. Back and forth, back and forth. Then he froze. He pawed once at a patch of loose gravel. Nothing. He moved several feet away, sniffed again, returned to the exact same spot. This time he dug. Small stones scattered across the ledge. Sheriff Carson laughed softly. Maybe he found another squirrel. Daniel didn't answer. Atlas had never searched without purpose. The dog continued digging despite the pain in his healing shoulder. Emily knelt beside him. Easy, boy. Atlas ignored her gentle voice. His paws worked steadily until they struck something solid beneath the loose rock. Clink. Everyone stopped. Daniel dropped to one knee. Hold on. Using a small hand shovel from the evidence kit, he carefully removed layer after layer of gravel. The hole grew deeper. Nearly 2 feet below the surface, dull gray metal appeared beneath compacted earth. Sheriff Carson frowned. That's not natural. Daniel brushed away more dirt. The shape slowly emerged. Another iron plate, larger than the first. Unlike the hidden lock inside the stagecoach, this one had been buried directly beneath the ledge itself. Emily stared in disbelief. There was another compartment. Daniel measured the outline. No. He shook his head slowly. This is separate. Atlas sat beside the excavation, his tail sweeping gently across the stone, almost proudly. Sheriff Carson radioed the deputies below. We're going to need more equipment. Within the hour, careful excavation began. No explosives, no heavy machinery, only brushes, trowels, and patient hands. As more soil disappeared, the true shape became visible. An iron hatch nearly 4 feet wide had been built directly into the rock. Heavy hinges lined one edge. A rusted lifting ring rested in the center. Emily whispered, "Someone built this before the landslide." Daniel nodded. long before. 4 people strained together to lift the hatch. At first it refused to move. Then, with a deep groan that echoed across the canyon, it slowly opened. Cool air escaped from the darkness below. Daniel switched on his flashlight. Stone steps disappeared into a narrow underground chamber. The room could not have been more than 8 feet square. Yet every wall contained neatly stacked wooden crates protected beneath layers of waxed canvas. Sheriff Carson descended first. Emily followed. Daniel came last with Atlas close behind. The flashlight beams swept across the chamber. One crate had broken open decades earlier. Inside rested gold bars stamped with early 20th century mint markings. Emily stared silently. There was more. Daniel nodded. The stagecoach wasn't the final destination. Sheriff Carson carefully opened another crate. Not gold. Leather document tubes, wax-sealed envelopes, rolled maps, property deeds, bound journals. Everything had remained dry inside the sealed chamber. Daniel opened one journal carefully. Its pages described meetings between local businessmen following the disappearance of the Silver Creek stagecoach. The names matched those inside the payroll ledger. Another document contained original land deeds signed under obvious coercion. Families had been threatened into surrendering ranches that later became part of the Holloway holdings. Emily opened another tube. Inside lay signed affidavits from witnesses who had disappeared shortly after giving their statements. Sheriff Carson removed his hat. My God. Daniel quietly looked around the chamber. This wasn't just stolen gold. Emily finished the thought. It was the archive. Atlas wandered to the back wall. He sniffed gently at a weathered wooden box smaller than all the others. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside rested several faded military medals, a folded American flag, and a handwritten letter addressed simply, "To whoever finally finds the truth." Daniel unfolded the brittle paper. The handwriting belonged to one of the army officers assigned to guard the payroll. His final words filled the chamber with silence. If these records survive longer than we do, let history remember that honest men tried to protect what was entrusted to them. We failed because greed wore a respectable face. Someday another soldier will finish what we could not. Daniel lowered the letter. No one spoke. Atlas quietly rested against his leg. For a long moment, the old soldier looked at the aging military dog beside him. You did it, partner. Atlas looked up with calm brown eyes, not seeking praise, only waiting for whatever came next. High above the canyon, sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the stagecoach and the hidden chamber below. The mountain had finally surrendered every secret it had guarded for a century. And thanks to one loyal K9 who refused to stop digging, the truth could never be buried again. Word spread through Colorado faster than anyone in Silver Hollow expected. By the following morning, the narrow mountain road leading into town was lined with county vehicles, state investigators, army historians, and federal agents. Camera crews waited behind temporary barricades, hoping for a glimpse of the legendary Silver Creek stagecoach that had emerged from a century of silence. Daniel Mercer stayed far from the microphones. He sat beneath a towering ponderosa pine near the canyon entrance, pouring fresh water into Atlas's bowl. The old German shepherd drank slowly before settling beside him. His shoulder had healed well enough that the bandage was gone, leaving only a narrow scar hidden beneath his silver and black fur. Daniel smiled. You've earned a few more gray hairs. Atlas leaned gently against his leg. Nearby, Dr. Emily Carter watched federal evidence technicians carefully catalog every artifact removed from the underground chamber. Every document was photographed. Every gold bar was weighed. Every military record was sealed inside climate-controlled cases. Nothing was rushed. History deserved patience. Sheriff Bill Carson approached Daniel carrying a thick folder. "They've finished authenticating the first batch." Daniel looked up. "Already?" "The Army kept excellent records." The sheriff opened the folder. "The serial numbers on the payroll manifests match archived records in Washington." He paused. "So do the signatures." Daniel nodded quietly. "No more legends." "No." Carson smiled. "Now it's evidence." Inside the temporary command tent, historians carefully unfolded the final letter written by Captain Nathaniel Brooks, the Army officer who had commanded the payroll escort a century earlier. Several older veterans stood silently as the letter was read aloud. The words filled the room with unexpected emotion, not because they spoke about gold, because they spoke about duty, about ordinary soldiers who had remained loyal even after realizing powerful men had betrayed them. One elderly Korean War veteran quietly removed his cap. They kept their oath, another answered softly, and somebody finally kept it for them. Daniel remained outside. He had never been comfortable standing in front of crowds. Emily found him watching Atlas chase falling pine cones with slow, playful steps. "I've never seen him do that." Daniel laughed. "He only plays when he feels safe." Emily looked toward the canyon. "I guess he finally does." By afternoon, investigators had traced every document recovered from the hidden chamber. The evidence painted a devastating picture. For generations, the Holloway family had quietly expanded its land holdings through fraudulent deeds created after the disappearance of the Silver Creek Stagecoach. Several ranches had been stolen from grieving widows. Others had been seized from immigrant families who never understood the contracts they were forced to sign. Mining claims had been transferred through forged paperwork. Every page confirmed another injustice. Every signature strengthened the case. Garrett Holloway arrived shortly after noon, accompanied by a team of attorneys. His expensive truck rolled to a stop outside the command post. He stepped out wearing the same confident expression that had once intimidated an entire town. This time, no one looked impressed. Federal investigators greeted him politely before requesting access to company records connected to several historic land transfers. Garrett remained calm. "My family has owned this property legally for generations." One investigator quietly opened the recovered ledger. "So you won't mind explaining these signatures?" Garrett's eyes settled on the page. For the first time since Daniel had met him, confidence disappeared. His grandfather's handwriting stared back at him from paper that had survived 100 years beneath stone. The silence lasted several long seconds. Garrett slowly closed the ledger. "My attorney will respond." The lead investigator nodded. "We expected that." Garrett looked across the clearing. His eyes met Daniel's. Neither man spoke. Nothing remained to argue about. The evidence spoke louder than either of them ever could. By evening, state officials announced that dozens of disputed land titles would undergo formal review. Families whose ancestors had disappeared from county records would finally receive answers. Some might even recover property stolen generations earlier. Walter Morrison stood quietly beside Daniel. "My grandfather always said something wasn't right." Daniel looked toward the mountains. "Looks like he was right." Walter smiled sadly. "He'd have liked you. I wish I'd met him." "So do I." The following morning brought another ceremony. This one wasn't planned. Several active-duty soldiers from a nearby Army installation arrived carrying a folded American flag. Their commanding officer approached Daniel. "Mr. Mercer?" Daniel stood. "Yes, sir." The officer smiled. "You don't have to call me sir." He glanced toward Atlas. "I heard about your partner." Daniel rested one hand on the old shepherd's neck. "He deserves most of the credit. I've read the reports. The officer nodded. I agree. He unfolded the flag carefully. Our command requested permission to recognize the soldiers who died protecting the Silver Creek payroll. Daniel's expression softened. They finally found their way home. We believe so. The flag was raised overlooking the canyon. A bugler played softly across the valley. Wind carried the notes through the pine forest until they echoed among the cliffs where the stagecoach had rested for a century. Many people wiped away tears, including veterans who rarely showed emotion. Daniel stood quietly with Atlas beside him. He saluted, not because cameras watched, not because anyone expected it, because somewhere inside that hidden chamber, one soldier had trusted another soldier who had not yet been born. And somehow, across 100 years, that trust had been honored. After the ceremony, a federal official approached Daniel carrying several legal documents. Mr. Mercer. Daniel lowered his salute. These authorize your lawful salvage award under state and federal law. Daniel accepted the envelope without opening it. I appreciate it. The recovered gold belongs largely to the government and verified claimants. I understand. But under the law, the official smiled. You and Dr. Carter are entitled to a substantial recovery award for locating, preserving, and reporting the site. Daniel looked toward Emily. She shook her head gently. We didn't do this for money. The official nodded. Which is exactly why you deserve it. Daniel quietly placed the envelope inside his backpack. He looked down at Atlas. We'll figure it out later. The old dog simply leaned against him. Late that afternoon, reporters finally persuaded Daniel to answer one question. Microphones extended toward him. Cameras focused. A young journalist asked softly, Mr. Mercer, after everything that's happened, what does this discovery mean to you? Daniel looked across the mountains before answering. It means history matters. He paused. It means people who do the right thing shouldn't disappear just because powerful people want them forgotten. His hand rested gently on Atlas's head. And sometimes, he smiled at his old friend. The hero has 4 legs. The crowd applauded. Atlas looked slightly confused by the sudden attention. Daniel laughed quietly. You never cared much for applause. The old German shepherd wagged his tail once. As the sun began setting behind the San Juan Mountains, golden light spilled across the restored stagecoach, the American flag above the canyon, and the people gathered below. Justice had finally reached a place where history had once been buried. But for Daniel Mercer, the greatest reward was still waiting beyond the mountains. For the first time since leaving the Navy, he could finally imagine a future, not beneath a railroad bridge, but somewhere Atlas could truly call home. Winter arrived gently in the San Juan Mountains. Instead of fierce blizzards, soft snow drifted over the high peaks, settling across pine branches and empty meadows like quiet blessings. The canyon that had guarded its secret for a century now stood protected by the state, its trails carefully marked, its history preserved rather than forgotten. The Silver Creek stagecoach remained exactly where investigators had found it. Engineers had reinforced the ledge without moving the coach itself, preserving it as a historical landmark overlooking the valley below. Visitors now stopped at an observation platform built a safe distance away, reading the story of the soldiers who had died protecting the Army payroll and the remarkable discovery made by a homeless Navy SEAL and his retired military K-9. Daniel Mercer rarely visited during busy hours. He preferred sunrise. The mountains belonged to silence then. One cold December morning, he parked an old pickup beside the trailhead and walked the familiar path with Atlas trotting beside him. The old German shepherd's shoulder had healed completely, Only a thin silver scar remained beneath his coat. Daniel smiled every time he saw it, not because it reminded him of pain, because it reminded him of loyalty. They reached the overlook just as the first rays of sunlight touched the stagecoach. The weathered wood glowed softly against the red sandstone cliffs. For a long moment, neither man nor dog moved. Daniel removed his gloves. He rested one hand on the wooden memorial plaque standing beside the trail. It bore the names of every known army guard who had died protecting the payroll more than 100 years earlier. At the bottom of the inscription appeared one final sentence. Truth may sleep beneath stone, but honor never dies. Daniel stood quietly. So we made it. Atlas leaned gently against his leg. As always. Months earlier, Daniel would have expected memories of war to crowd his thoughts in moments like this. Instead, he remembered faces. Walter Morrison smiling beneath his old cowboy hat. Sheriff Carson tipping his cap after another long day. The little girl tying a blue ribbon around Atlas's collar. Emily laughing when Atlas stole her work gloves and refused to give them back until she chased him across an open field. The memories no longer hurt. They healed. Life had quietly replaced survival. A truck approached along the gravel road behind them. Emily stepped out carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. You disappeared again. Daniel accepted one with a smile. I figured you'd find me. I always do. She looked toward Atlas. So does he. The old German shepherd happily accepted the treat she carried in her coat pocket. Emily laughed. I think he's beginning to like me. Daniel raised one eyebrow. Beginning? Atlas wagged his tail enthusiastically. I stand corrected. They stood together overlooking the valley. Snow-covered ranches stretched toward the horizon. Smoke rose peacefully from chimneys throughout Silver Hollow. The town looked different now, not because its buildings had changed, because its people had. Several ranches had already been returned to descendants of families who had lost everything generations earlier. Others were still working through the legal process. But justice had begun. And this time, it wasn't stopping. Daniel eventually opened the official envelope he had carried for weeks. The salvage award was more than he had ever imagined. Enough to buy a palace if he wanted one. Instead, he bought something very different, a modest cattle ranch bordering the eastern edge of the valley. 40 acres, an old red barn, a weathered farmhouse with a porch facing the mountains. 2 creeks crossed the property before disappearing into a meadow where wildflowers bloomed every spring. Nothing extravagant, everything honest. The first night inside the house felt almost unreal. Daniel kept waking up. Not from nightmares, from silence. No traffic beneath the bridge. No cold wind slipping through broken concrete. Only the quiet creaking of old wood and the distant call of an owl. Atlas refused to sleep indoors. Not at first. Instead, he curled up on the porch, guarding, watching, just as he always had. Daniel opened the front door. You know. Atlas looked up. We're allowed inside now. The German shepherd tilted his head. Daniel laughed. It still feels strange to me, too. He carried one of his old army blankets into the living room and spread it beside the stone fireplace. Atlas walked in slowly. He sniffed every corner of the room. The fireplace, the windows, the boots beside the door. Finally, he circled twice before lying down on the blanket. His eyes slowly closed. For the first time in years, neither soldier had to sleep with one ear open. Spring arrived with unexpected gifts. Emily purchased the neighboring property and transformed the old horse stable into a wildlife rehabilitation clinic. Injured hawks, orphaned foxes, young elk caught in fencing. Every week another animal found its way to her care. Daniel often helped repair enclosures or transport injured wildlife through the mountains. Atlas appointed himself official greeter. Visitors rarely noticed the scar on his shoulder. They noticed his gentle patience instead. Children loved him. Veterans seemed to understand him. Every Memorial Day, Daniel hiked back to the canyon carrying fresh American flags. Atlas made the journey beside him every year. The trail had become easier, not because the mountain had changed, because the burden had. One afternoon, nearly a year after the discovery, Walter Morrison joined them at the overlook. The old rancher removed his hat. My grandfather would have smiled. Daniel looked toward the stagecoach. I think he already is. Walter nodded toward Atlas. You know, he chuckled softly. Most folks still say you found the stagecoach. Daniel looked down at his old friend. They're wrong. Walter smiled knowingly. I figured you'd say that. Daniel scratched behind Atlas's ears. I just followed him. The old German shepherd wagged his tail once, as if confirming the story. The sun slowly dipped toward the western horizon. Golden light spilled across the mountains, the restored memorial, and the quiet valley below. Daniel looked toward the ranch that now waited for them, toward the porch where Atlas would soon stretch out beneath the evening sky, toward a future that no longer frightened him. He realized something then. The greatest treasure had never been hidden beneath the stagecoach. It had never been locked inside the mountain. It had never been counted in gold. It was the chance to stand beside those you trust, to tell the truth even when no one believes you, to honor those who came before you, to build a home where loyalty is returned with love. Daniel rested one final hand on Atlas's neck. Ready to go home, partner? Atlas stood immediately. His tail moved slowly as he looked toward the trail leading back to the ranch. Together they walked into the fading light. One former Navy SEAL, one faithful military dog, leaving behind a legend they had uncovered, and carrying forward a life they had finally earned. The mountain had guarded its secret for 100 years. In the end, it did not choose the strongest man. It chose the one who refused to abandon the truth, and it chose the dog who never abandoned him. If this story reminded you that loyalty and doing what's right are worth more than gold, comment one below. And if you've ever seen honesty win in the end, we'd love to hear your story. Thanks for spending this time with us. And if stories about courage, justice, and second chances mean something to you, subscribe and join us for the next journey.